Now, Business for South Africa was represented at the meeting by its steering committee chair, Martin Kingston, who joins us now this evening. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time, Martin. Thank you for joining us. As President Cyril Ramaphosa convened this meeting to pave a new era of collaboration under South Africa's 7th democratic administration, some commitments were reaffirmed, others were new ones were made, while some were now in line with the government of national unity. What did you take and what were your thoughts as you were in this meeting and looking to find ways to really stimulate the country's economy?
Well, good evening, Mpo. In fact, it was a very good meeting. It lasted for about 3 hours. Part of it was to assess the progress that we'd made over the past year. When the partnership was established, focusing, as you've reported, on the 3 areas of energy, transport and logistics, and crime and corruption, to determine where we'd really made sort of significant headway. Obviously, energy and the curtailment of load shedding for the last 140 plus days is a good example. And other areas where there's still significant work to do, the implementation of further structural reform across all of the areas concerned. Improving the operational efficiency, for example, at Transnet, curbing, in fact, reducing crime and levels of crime and prosecuting so that we can get off the grey list, exactly as your report had said, and giving ourselves ambitious targets, I would say realistic and achievable, but nevertheless aggressive targets for the coming 12 to 18 months, as you've indicated under the 7th administration, the first meeting that we've had with the government of national unity.
As you talk about, ambitious targets, listening into what one of the guests was saying a short while ago in this package is that the conversation now needs to move from load shedding to now addressing, the system efficiency and structural reform, moving it to a more advanced stage so that we can come up with longer term solutions that will have a bigger impact.
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, that was James McKay, the Chief Executive of the Energy Council, who was speaking, who's leading our work on the energy pillar, supporting the National Energy Crisis Committee. And obviously, maintaining structural reform is absolutely critical, opening the way for the private sector to participate more fully and appropriately in a suitably regulated environment, addressing the issue of tariffs, whether or not and how the municipalities are going to pay for the debt that they owe and they've incurred in the context of power. All of that is on the table. We went through that in considerable detail. We've reprioritized, indeed, the focus areas for the National Energy Crisis Committee, just as we have confirmed that the National Logistics Crisis Committee and the role and the position of Transnet needs to be enhanced and reinforced going forwards, that we need to support, in that particular case, the Transnet board and management with many of the subject matter experts that have already been made available across all of these 3 areas by the private sector.
Of course, this is a meeting which comes at a critical inflection point for the country. I mean, just yesterday, Stats SA released figures indicating that unemployment in South Africa is now at 33.5%. It's the highest rate since the year 2022. What do these figures reveal or perhaps expose about the current climate for business operation in the country?
Well, in fact, the statistics, exactly as you say, were discussed yesterday in the meeting with the President and Cabinet. Very concerning for all of us. The only way that we're going to be able to create sustainable jobs, of course, is to ensure that we've got inclusive economic growth of the level that the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition was talking about. That's 3 to 5%. The 3 areas that we were talking about, energy, transport and logistics and crime and corruption, have fundamentally constrained the scope for real sustainable economic growth, and therefore they've had to be addressed in the way in which we're doing it. But it's going to take time. In the meanwhile, employment has also become a key area for discussion. It was, again, a focus of some of the issues that were raised yesterday, particularly, but not only, youth unemployment, where the statistics are even more dire than for the population, the working population at large, and how business can coordinate its existing efforts to address youth unemployment and skills upliftment in a more effective way, working alongside government.
What about the red tape when it comes to entrepreneurship and accessing finance and branching out into the different sectors that could be viable for the country's economy. How much was expanded on that front, and how accessible is it for business and entrepreneurs to access the space?
So you could have been a fly on the wall, Mpo, with that question, because that, of course, was indeed raised and the subject matter of discussion, in particular, the area of small and medium-sized enterprises, both formal and informal, the need to be able to access finance on appropriate terms, the role that the financial sector must and could play. In fact, the President talked about the role that it had played as a government and also with the private sector during the pandemic to try and limit the exposure that small businesses had. One of the aspects of red tape, of course, is visa reform, and the Minister of Home Affairs was very clear about the need to accelerate many of the interventions there, in particular in sectors which are amenable to significant employment, such as tourism, and I think gave us cause for optimism. All of this, of course, underpinned by the statement of intent signed by the members of the Government of National Unity. Businesses very supportive of the principles that are enshrined in that statement of intent, which actually encapsulate many of the areas that we're focusing on in terms of operational efficiency of our network industries, the need to implement structural reform, and to make sure that skills and capacity is available to government, to the state more generally, but working in collaboration with the private sector wherever it's appropriate and possible.
What would you say differentiates this engagement to previous engagements, besides it being held under the 7th administration, and really just understanding that when all is said and done, it's a collaboration built on the recognition that there is urgent action which is needed to confront the kind of challenges that place South Africa on a trajectory of growth and job creation, instead of it all being a talk shop and not much being affected, and not being able to see the impact of such a collaboration?
Yeah, well, some of these things take time, Mpo. I think the reality is that we spent some of the early period establishing structures, systems, governance and oversight, making sure we were reporting to the public at large on the progress we were making, setting realistic, albeit ambitious, targets for each and every one of the work streams, critical paths that would hold us collectively to account. And if we look back, the reality is that we are through the worst of load shedding and have been now for a number of months. The next step lies ahead, whether it's transmission or, as I said, addressing the affordability of tariffs. The same thing in terms of port and rail. We've seen an improvement in the waiting time for vessels at anchor significantly. We've seen the restructuring of the balance sheet of Eskom. We've seen the provision of guarantees by National Treasury to enable the restructuring of the balance sheet of Transnet. We've seen a curtailment or a reduction in security incidents on the coal line. We're very clear about what needs to be done to take us off the grey list. If we're going to be able to achieve that, as Anton du Plessis was saying, representing the NPA in the crime and corruption work stream. So I think that actually there has been real and discernible progress which we need to build upon. Of course, it gets more difficult as we move ahead, because we start encountering some of the bigger challenges that we had already identified, just as we recognize that we need to mobilize additional resources. As I mentioned, we've had some 350 subject matter experts working across power stations alongside Transnet, appropriately engaging with the NPA in the crime and corruption work stream. But that's not enough. We need to mobilize more resources in a manner that withstands scrutiny, that is transparent and at arm's length. I don't think that we should assume that that's easy, just as there are other areas that are being recommended for consideration, be it water, infrastructure, local government. And there we're going to have to, and we agreed, reflect on if it's appropriate to do so without in any way undermining the work that's already being done in the three critical focal areas that I have mentioned.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Let's perhaps leave it there for now. Speaking there to Business for South Africa's Steering Committee Chair, Martin Kingston, on the back of a collaborative meeting with government, business and government.